Hello there, and welcome in. Today I will tell you a story. A story that takes place in the fantastical continent of Faerun. So yes, I'm telling you a story of a Dungeons and Dragons campaign I'm currently running. We will do videos every time an in-game month has passed in-game, and we're starting with the month of Hammer, which is the first month of the year, in the year 1496. Sorry, 69 would have been fun, wouldn't it? But it has already passed. We will start, as I often do, the first day of the year. But as a disclaimer, the world has been headcanoned by me, and it is not exactly as it is as the vanilla D&D setting, but rather it has been affected by previous campaigns I've run, as well as certain things have headcanon to be otherwise. So we start our journey in the mountain of Smokespire, which is a dormant volcano and a lair of a dragon, a red dragon nonetheless. So let me get into character and blammo. It was noon of the first day of the new year in 1496. The company, nay, the fellowship of the fantabulous flute, had arrived at the Smokespire mountain just the previous morning. They had been fighting kobolds and gnolls and dragonborn and other creatures of various origins, all sworn allegiance to this deceiver, as the dragon they were hunting had been called. At least, who contacted them in the town of Greenest had called him the deceiver, a treacherous red dragon with no equal in his brutality. But they had been lied to, not by the nature of the dragon. He was truly one of a kind, but he was no deceiver. He was the dragon slayer. He was the flying flame, Anubahor, the one and only Balagos. And as they had made way to his treasure hoard at the bottom of the chasm that used to be a volcano, and the dragon swooped down from the sky at the unexpected party, this was no young dragon with an ill reputation. This was a legendary dragon of unrivaled ambition and power. Well, almost unrivaled power. His ambition may be completely unrivaled, though. At that moment, the fellowship knew they fucked up. The biggest mistake anyone in Greenfield's or Giant's Plain could do is to draw the wrath of Balagos. Some would wonder, why isn't Greenfields part of Cormur, Elturgard, Amn, or Erlgazar, any of the realms neighboring the area? Balagos was the reason. No one was safe should they antagonize the Great Worm. The Bard, who was usually considered the leader of the group, Ekemon, a tiefling, very charismatic fellow. He was trying to downplay the destruction of the dragon's servants they had caused, trying to cut things with humor, as was his way, as it would seem Balagos wasn't in good humors that day. So Ekemon had his face smashed into the walls of the volcano by Balagos' mighty tail. And at that instant, a mark appeared on the forehead where the dragon had slashed with his tail. He wasn't going to destroy these adventurers, no. He was going to humiliate them and have them owe him a debt. Because if they had the competence to dispatch with his defenses so easily, there would be a chance that they could prove useful to him and his ambitions. The fellowship was torn. The bard had been incapacitated. Something that hadn't happened in the 5 years they had been adventuring together. As the bard was the storyteller of the night priestess Samira, she was the first to take a step forward and try and negotiate. But she too was marked by the dragon in her chest. The next to be marked was the druid Wun, a water genasi. A curious being, born of both human and elemental beings from the plane of water. He too was marked. He saw no purpose trying the object. He actually rarely argued about anything unless the natural balance was at stake. He was a true druid at heart. Dugmar, the mighty Dugmar, a warforged, created by the hammers of Moradin, had always considered himself to be the first line of defense, and as Ekemon lay unconscious, 2 of his comrades already been marked, he thought he had failed in his mission of protecting the others. He took a step forward in his mighty armor, but with a single touch of the mighty Balagos, his magical armor melted, and his chest bore the mark of the dragon, or the curse. Then, after stripping the adventurers from every single magical item they had accumulated, and most of their wealth, then the dragon finally spoke. You foolish mortals dared enter my home in defiance of my power. You will have to repent for that. And therefore, I have passed a curse on you. But it isn't forever. Once you prove that you have become worthy again, the curse will turn into a blessing, granting you even more power than you had before. At that time, the Fellowship realized that the curse had drained them of their power, their skills, their accumulated experience. Their skills were as they had been when they had first started adventuring. This disheartened them, but they had no choice but to accept the terms of Balagos. Samira asked, how does it exactly work? How do they turn the curse to a blessing? A mighty dragon mark. Balagos simply said, you all feel a pull when I send a prompt, a telepathic prompt, when you happen to be in a proximity, in an area where there's something I want done. And then the first one to press on their mark will receive the telepathic instructions from me. But be wary, listen carefully, as I will not be repeating myself, and this link does not work both ways. And if you fail to accomplish the task I have given in the given time, I will devour your soul. You will cease to be, and your power will be added to mine. So don't fail me. Now first, let's have an example. And they all started feeling the pull. Dugmar, eager to make recompense for failing to protect the others, pressed his mark hastily and got the first set of psychic instructions. The person who had sent them on this fool's errand to attack Balagos, who had caused so many deaths of his servants, would need to die. He would need to be flayed, executed, and strung up for all to see. What happens to those who defy the flying flame? Fortunately for the morality of our fellowship, Balagos hadn't specified that they would need to be flayed alive. So our valiant adventurers just decided that it would be for the best if they executed the person first and then flayed him afterwards. It would be best for everyone. Then, as Balagos gave them permission to depart, they left northwards towards the Traders' Road, which they reached in 2 days. And then, as they arrived on the road, they found a golden ring that felt cold to the touch. It was placed on a tree branch near the road, and there were 1 set of boot prints and 10 sets of hoof prints going into the forest, but no boot prints or and only 6 sets of hoof prints coming back. Obviously, being curious in nature, Ekemon proceeded to walk into the woods. The others followed, trying to ask him to consider a path of caution. However, it did not happen. Now, this part of the Traders' Road was in the southern reaches of the kingdom of Cormur, as you can see from the map. Here, halfway between Eversold and Priapol, they ventured into the woods and they found a scene of battle. There were 4 dead horses, 6 dead riders, all torn apart in vicious rage, and a woman, impaled, lanced to the ground, stripped of all her earthly possessions, completely naked. Dugmar proceeded to remove the lance and wrap her in his cloak, as Ekemon and Samira used their magic to heal this woman. They had no idea why the Purple Dragon Knights of Cormur had killed her, or attempted to, as she was somehow still alive. She was suffering from, as it became apparent on the following morning, suffering from amnesia. A group of local peasants were looking for the battle site as well, and they kept the woman they had found separate from it, and these peasants were seeking the corpse of a witch, wanted to make sure that their homes were safe, as this witch had been moving around these parts for quite some time. The party managed to convince the peasants to depart and promised to deliver them news as they found out. They promised to search the area. However, it turned out the description of the witch matched perfectly the description of the woman with amnesia. They gave, just in case, they gave the cold ring to this woman, and somehow she remembered the command word of the ring and summoned forth a succubus. She wasn't an original succubus because she had something of an elven appearance, and she explained she used to be an elf. Just a few years ago, before she made a pact with the Lord of Cania, Mephistopheles, the second most powerful being in the 9 hells of Bartor. But furthermore, she was able to clarify a bit about who this woman was, because you see, this ring was one of the magical items taken by the knights from this woman after they had defeated her in battle. And as she managed to attune herself to the ring once more, she was able to recall some of her lost memories, such as that the succubus was correct indeed. Her name was Athelora. Now let me stop here for a moment. Athelora, my name, is something I use for an NPC in almost every single tabletop RPG campaign I ever run. She's either going to be an NPC or a DMPC, like a member of the group but operated by the DM. Me. Anyway, she gave them a list of items that had been taken from her, and asked for their help. Well, as they had promised to find more out about the witch and go to the village the peasants had come from, they did so. They indeed did so. So they went to the village close to Eversalt and told the news. However, Ekemon did lie, and did so poorly. So the peasants rushed to conclusions that these adventures were party to whatever mischief the witch had been up to. Some of them started rushing to Eversalt to report this, and the others started attacking them. However, Wynn, the druid, cast an entangling spell that allowed them to escape without having to fight the poor peasants. And they escaped south of the Traders' Road, making their way back to Greenest. Now, unable to use the roads they had used before, it took them whole 9 days to get back to Greenest. When they arrived in Greenest, Dugmar went to the dwarves, as he had close affiliation with their kind, and asked their permission to use their forge, which he could do by paying small rent, and was allowed to craft some armor, shields and weapons to make up for the items lost to the dragon. Obviously these were not magical items, but they were decent. That night they also used their magic, the bards singing, and Athilora's surprising talent for dance, and made quite a bit of money. This must have been the best show this town had seen in many years. Probably the only one, because it didn't look like this town got many visitors at all. It wasn't in the way of any actual major road. It actually was off even the Aldun trail. So it was very remote town. The only significant thing that had ever happened in Greenest was the Cult of the Dragon attacking the place a few years before. Soon they found out that there was indeed a halfling in the town who had been known to serve as a runner, some sort of low-level affiliate for the dragon cultists. So the company decided to try and ambush the halfling after they learned of his habits, but they could only place his location in the mornings. What he did after mornings, they could not find out. The first attempt at catching the halfling failed miserably. That night, Athilora crafted some tranquilizer darts, and while Dugmar still went to the Dwarven Forge, crafting some items, the rest of the group the next morning managed to capture this halfling, but not without any trouble, as they indeed had used magic more powerful than they should have. Ekemon did that, to be precise, and there were a small group of the cowled wizards from Athkathla, the capital of Amn, the greedy mages who guarded the arcane in the area, and they did have some pull in the areas of the green fields. So when Ekemon cast a spell too powerful to be cast in the midst of civilization, the Cold Wizards arrived and said their catchphrase: "You have been found guilty in unsanctioned use of magical energy." Well, Athilora stepped in between and threatened them with the wrath of Balagos, daring to operate in his domain. The mages said they would remember this, but they departed nonetheless. Anyway, the halfling had been subdued. And Dugmar reluctantly crafted Athilora a little something she requested to have an enhanced interrogation with the halfling. So basically a torture kit. Torturous tools. The rest of the group understood that it might be necessary, so they wouldn't waste days and days of time and have the halflings associates flee. They didn't like it, but it felt like it was necessary. So they left Athilora to it, and after a few hours, Athilora told them that his Cult of the Dragon contact had been Dunil, secretary of the mayor, nay, the governor of Greenest. Now, they needed more proof if they were to go after the actual governor's secretary, who was well liked in the community, so they couldn't go after him without more evidence than word of thief. And as they were debating how to go about it, Athilora promptly decided to execute the poor halfling, simply stating that if we can't act right away and the halfling is allowed to warn Dunil of what we're doing, we will fail and Dugmar will die. They didn't agree with Athilora's actions, but could not argue with her logic. However, she did promise not to execute anyone in cold blood without consulting the rest of the company first, in the future. She was clearly not cut from the same cloth as the others. As it turned out, she was part dragon, descendant of the very dragon they had been cursed by. And who knows why they suffered her company. Maybe helping someone in need was the right thing to do. Maybe helping her recover her memories and magical items would lessen the dragon's wrath at their trespasses against him. Who knows? Only the Fellowship of the Fantabulous Flute know. But they decided that after they fumbled, they would no longer be called that. So Athilora suggested they be called the Company of the Scarlet Sword. As no one really could agree on any other suggestion, it was agreed that they were now the Scarlet Sword. The next day they went to the Temple of Chauntea, goddess of harvest and fertility, and had Dugmar's memories recovered, as they could not remember anything about the person that had hired them, and he did manage to recall, even though the person had been disguised, he was clearly a man, most likely human based on his height and body structure, and dressed in a Cult of the Dragon robe, and they met at the Drunken Rat, a local watering hole. Having recovered memories and what the halfling said, they decided to talk to the mayor, the governor, and Escobert Dread, the dwarven castellan in charge of protecting the township of Greenest. The mayor was absolutely horrified and seemed to be in shock. Sorry, I'm so sorry I keep calling him mayor. Governor. Damn, Arthi. Damn. Okay, and they agreed that with the clerics of Chauntea testifying that Daniel was likely guilty of being a member of Cult of the Dragon, something that was highly illegal in Greenest, considering the same cult had tried to destroy their town less than 10 years ago. So Dugmar took on himself to do the unpleasant task of killing, flaying, and stringing up the corpse. And Escobert had agreed that until the snows melt, the corpse would be allowed to be displayed at the edge of the town square, as a reminder of what happens to anyone serving those, and I quote, "these fucking worthless dragon wankers." It turned out the dragon mark wasn't entirely compatible with Dugmar's magical software thingy, and he kind of went into a let's call it autopilot, not able to do anything on his own for the next 6 days. And then as he woke up, they were no longer in Greenest, they were in the town of Nashkau, where the night before had been an incident between the miners and the lord of the town, and the miners had actually been slaughtered due to Ekemon trying to interfere in the situation, and that didn't end well for the miners. So Ekemon indirectly caused the deaths of a few dozen miners, and they wanted to get out of the town. But first, Samirawun and Athilora met with the local lord to discuss the events, to explain what they got in the middle of. And it turned out the mine was closed, and the lord made the judgment call not to tell of the kobold infestation in the mines. A professional mercenary company was coming from north, from Baldur's Gate, to deal with the situation, but the miners simply got too restless, and as they were attacking the Lord's manor, the town guard had to make examples out of them. Then they started traveling towards Athkathla, where they had divined the location of one of Athilora's stolen magical items. The golden choker with a cross pattern. It was an item that empowered her physical power as well as her magical. So indeed she wanted that back. Also, each item she recovered seemed to restore more of her memory. The others were concerned as she was definitely not what would be traditionally considered a good person. She was ruthless, and that was becoming apparent. And she was also not a temperate person. She was prone to anger. But if she was truly descended from red dragons, that was only to be expected. They thus far had patience for her behavior, but who knows where it will lead eventually. Ekemon and Dugma donated some of their money to the miners whose families had been slain because of what Ekemon had done, interfering with the situation. And then the next morning they headed south through the mountain paths of the Cloud Peaks. Now, there was something unfortunate that happened. A gateway to Phlegethos, the fourth plane of Bartor, opened, and Belial himself stepped out. You know, Belial, the Archdevil. He was very charming and acted at a quite biblical way, you know, Satan tempting with deals. Ekemon, knowing a lot about the lower planes as a tiefling descended from actual devils, cautioned everyone against taking the deal. He turned to each and every one of them, one at a time, to ask, "What is it you truly desire?" Well, Ekemon and Dugma, as well as Ekemon and Dugma, managed to resist the temptation, mainly because Dugma only wants to benefit others, not himself. So he's not a good target for Devil Pact. And Ekemon knew quite enough to be able to resist the charms of Belial. Athilora, however, did not remember what she truly desires. Belial was very intrigued and said maybe we'll return to this at a later date. However, Wern and Samira could be persuaded to make a deal. One made a deal that for doing a single act of violence, people who were polluting the oceans and the sea of the fallen stars, this sea right here, would be attacked by natural phenomenon. And as he made the pact, well, Belial woke up 7 ancient krakens in that sea to have them attack ships disrespecting the sea. Samira, however, made a pact for fame and glory. As it was obvious from the get-go, and the price for her pact was to denounce her god, Milil, and worship Asmodeus, the king of hell, as her god after that. Well, afterwards, Achaemon mentioned something about making a deal to slay Balagos, and obviously Athilora did not really appreciate that. So she challenged Achaemon to a duel. Dugmar tried to intercept, but Achaemon decided to fight the duel against Athilora and was beaten. He did try to cast sleep magic and enter duel by tying her up until she relented, but as the group tried to approach her to do just that, apparently Balagos considered it a breach of honor, and each and every one had their marks burn their bodies with incredible power. So they had to stop that and fight the duel to the end. The interesting thing was that the duel actually brought the pair together. Achaemon apologized for threatening her family, and she apologized for her brash actions. Having arrived at Cremont on the 26th of Hammer, Samira fell to pits on the road and hurt herself badly and needed not even basic healing spells they had access to, but something more potent. So she had to be taken to a temple in Cremor, and she, having switched her deity to Asmodeus, didn't really have many temples willing to receive her, least of all that of Milil, as Grimmauld had an actual temple of Milil. But as they found a temple willing to heal her, it was done. Everyone else, she had to be there for over the night, and everyone but Samira needed to decide what they were going to do with their nights. Dugmar simply opted to rest on the stairs of the temple. Athilora went to the temple of Soon to participate in an orgy. And when it comes to Wyn and Ekemon, they went to a tavern, and Ekemon's performance that night drew some attention, and led to a threesome with two girls. The thing was, they were daughters of two traveling merchants who barged into the room. Wyn escaped the situation by turning into a small rodent slipping out, and Ekemon simply turned himself invisible. And thus they had to go and get Samira and sneak out of the town unnoticed. It took them most of the day to get to Athkathla, and they decided to split up in 3 groups. Athilora working by herself, Samira and Ekemon pairing up in one direction, and Wyn and Dugmar in the other. Wyn and Dugmar went to visit the Order of the Radiant Heart, order of clerics and paladins mostly devoted to Helm, the god of order, the vigilant watcher. As they had heard a necromancer had probably the choker, so they wanted to find out if there indeed was a necromancer. So there evidently was vampire or necromancer or vampire necromancer in the graveyard district. And as it turns out, what Wyn has to do in Athkathla to destroy the Temple of Helm, the Grand Temple, where the Patriarch, head of his entire church, lives, without warning them first. And Athilora's job was to study at the Temple of Saloon and try and find out if there was any way to go back on their deals without some horrifying consequences. They met with the vampire. It turned out vampire and necromancer were 2 separate persons. And the vampire promised to give both the necromancer and the choker she had for using in a ritual to return her brother back to life. After they are done with the ritual and her brother is breathing again, Ekemon and Samira made some deals, as they would need to be sneaked out of the city after they blow up the Temple of Helm, as it does not look like there's a way out of it. Samira's deal is a bit easier to deal with, as if a power more potent than Belial would require Samira's patronage, they would be able to keep Samira safe from the consequences. So they went and participated in an illegal to the death type of group tournament. Their first opponents were a group of pirates who were defeated with ease. Then the next day their opponents were a group of Duergar slavers calling themselves the Taskmasters. They were dealt with ease as well, and after that battle Ekemon cheaps out on his drink and gets physically ill. I mean, if you have drinks at the tavern that doubles as both a brothel and illegal fighting ring located in the slums of a massive city, you really shouldn't buy the cheapest drink available. Wynn managed to encounter their opponents for their final battle, led by a Cormurian man, knight in a purple cloak. And that's it for today. Thank you for bearing with me for a full hour. This took a lot longer than I had anticipated. Once we have played the second month to its completion, I will be making the second video, but for now I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.